Here, America, China, India, Russia, and Ukraine. Right now, we syntactically have means to demonstrate more probably and more practically. There's a semi-ancient trap we're in syntactically. For example, colonization itself was used remotely. There are proofs individually grouped and together. The countries involved with that before our country's founders were even born. Already humanity was syntactically talking about individuals, grouped values, and species volume, tactically ulterior from how we are that by nature. And that is only discernible per how nature's nature and the value of that simultaneously are bound distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously with the extent we have discernible, actually. And so this method knew that each age of everywhere the species body is around the globe, all exceptions, exception, nature, and demonstration of the same thing, and simultaneously what is increasingly hyper additional to itself. Increasingly while simultaneously involved with how it is actually explaining itself, nature, discernible through its nature's nature and the value of that. So when someone just uses the word nature, for example, there's a phenomenon that works better than computers work, better than calculators work. Someone could put the prefix hyper before the word nature. And there's a reason that the sounds have identities individually grouped in together, manifest. Everything is in demonstration of how sequence slash simultaneous nature are what existence slash space are. As that being generated by that which had already been generated, that is too finite, and so to the value, and so to relevant to the order of the value of the finite, the value and the value of the order of the finite, distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously. For example, when I say its identity relationship to itself per science is hyper simultaneous. So an individual is a sequence slash simultaneous nature, left to right, simultaneously right to left, for example, distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously, where its body of value, that which is actually hyper simultaneously being and having been true, not denying exception, exception nature, because how it uses exception, exception nature. So we have a means syntactically to have our country show them, people make opinions relevant to and as all they've ever heard. In other words, oh, these people are Republican, or these people are Democrat, or people whatever, independent. And the meaning of that has been in the way of this, which is relevant to where and how. For example, physics, metaphysics, and identity are three invisible but still discernible hyper additional values to our identity slash IES, and simultaneously, distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously, our, our identities slash our identity. In other words, we don't have control over the species body, means, but one way slash S that is hyper additional to itself. Evolution science does not leave out how we are distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, being and having been the ground, having being, not just having been. In other words, part of our bodies are gone, but part of it we are quality of diffusion. But see, now no longer syntactically with value treatments, for example. So, but we could admit now a quality of fact treatment nature, a quality slash s. In other words, we can mean stack if we stay honest about this and blaming the right thing. In other words, the method knew that predicate acts, criminal insidiousness natures, wrongdoers, criminal insidiousness, its natures of positive and negative treatments with logic, with psychology, are simultaneously identity treatments at all locations, areas, and states that were abridged, and where that this is still being exploited, it is still as victim predators slash hyper predators because syntactically, and everyone missed the significance of it. And the breaching method knew that nature would continually demonstrate itself. So had engineered, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken as, quote, shock and awe, and way worse, killed, way worse, torture. See, America has constitutional rights. And to like, this method knew that would make syntax punks as a certain kind of child abuse victim predator that never heard the identity of the law since semi-ancient times. Told proper. These are three bound natures, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, so we could discern the difference between the invisible but still discernible. So a predicate is a main verb in English grammar, and the verb and the subject are in every language is distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. As exception, nature, demonstration is the same thing, while simultaneously being in demonstration of what exception and exception nature is relevant to. This is relevant to where and how computers work, more so than how all exception nature are in demonstration of the same thing. For example, I'm not a lawyer, not police force, not criminal, not military. Boxing, wrestling, and the martial arts will help us. Because, in other words, individually grouped it together too. Know how grappling. It's mostly all grappling and wrestling. The WWF, whatever they have today, the open hand or whatever. Martial arts is mixed, like the grappling or and striking, and boxing is striking, but guys get taken grabbing each other's arms, messing up their time. A little bit, you can't help. There's a little bit of that there too. It's illegal, so you have to come. The sciences share an identity. That all the parts of our bodies share our identity, and our identity has a semi-nature relationship to the complete hyper-simultaneous. The identity of this hyper-simultaneous acts as it is actually being and having been and to come. So there is an extent of that which is manifest now that we know is true always, not denying the slightest exception. There is extent of that which we know is true always, not denying the slightest exception. And there is extent that we know of the future that is true always, not denying any exceptions, and relevant to where and how it reveals evolution's fruits and gifts and means out of nowhere. For example, relevant manifest increasingly is the value of sequence truth before the order of finite now. Our modern nations conceived with and as uses of our names individually grouped together, of others' names, forced, not by nature, but now by nature through ourselves, where and how being sustained with the, all that to the hurt, tricked, forced, or persuaded, taken in shock, no, needing to counter at all locations, areas, and states. Not just criminal insidiousness, not just hyper criminal insidiousness, but through as collusions with uses of all identity grounds, voices, and voicings, and positive and negative treatments that are simultaneously identity treatments. Simultaneously, they are the value of sequence. So there's the value of simultaneous treatments. In other words, since before our founders were even born, the suburbs were designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and consciously to make exceptions in demonstration of the same thing, but only the only exceptions available, consciously, methodically, without anyone even realizing, to have self-defended syntactically. Therefore, as identity voice, what can't be defended and not have nature itself demonstrate. So, in other words, so in other words, there is a thing called, I'm not a lawyer, not a police form or criminal, but this is nature demonstrates, science, actual honesty demonstrates, hyper honesty too. We have to be able to see if we can, there's a means to discern what is true, all the ways for this hyper science by, like for example, what were witch trials about? Real or made up? Relevant too. We know simultaneously what was recorded. Slavery sickly distinctly. Torture sickly distinctly. Identity theft, fraud, slander sickly distinctly against Native Americans. Sustained them against themselves because it's sustained in the value, the ground was tactically denatured, specifically to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, specifically to maintain complete possession of the human fact, human nature quality / IES. I tell it best, boxings. And so, in other words, India, for example, more honestly, every time, in other words, we have, in other words, how a computer works. One thing is sequence true here first, but one thing is true first. They have to be done something, so they're just switching. They're cutting seconds into milliseconds. So they're doing all the calculations that leave out how we are nature's body, and how that has complete possession over our needs. to use words like value, that have nothing to do, increasingly, with these suits and ties and counters to them in collusion because of differential criminal foreign influences. Victim predators A through Z of the species body, because this is all we have heard, other than can defend itself and interpret property, where our founders left us like this. Actually, that our founders wanted us in America, for example, to explain how everyone had their roles with the American Revolution. In other words, not just then, what really led them in other words, because individually grouped in together, sickly distinctly, before they were even born, slavery was entrenched in what is now North America and South America. Colonized countries, individually grouped in together, were being used remotely. And while it is that they are still being used remotely, the syntax natures, everyone A through Z, opinions, convictions, qualities of fact-keeping nature, aspects of fact-keeping nature that can't defend themselves and not call name to someone other. Not because it's personal. In other words, there's that lack of integrity to the law. No one even had explained to you what is actually recorded. If they found out that our founders counter extorted everyone else and themselves, how it really played out, they would have been that would have been worse. They put divide and conquer, things like that. They make everyone divide and conquer after they already, before that, further all kinds of physical delusions and simultaneously criminally foreign influence qualities of fact-keeping nature, aspects of fact-keeping nature, relevant to the opinions and convictions that the experts of each body have made, relevant to where and how this method knew how to measure, to maintain. There's also databases tied in ways that came since before computers that have nothing to do with the databases. In fact, it made and keeps increasingly exceptions and exception nature because it increasingly needs to screen itself. A breaching method. The ancients used, there it is more probable and is more practical and is demonstrably how yin yang and alpha and omega are hyper-additional to themselves. And the ancients would teach this is about exceptions and exception nature. For example, yin yang can never part because this is the science of, this is about the species body volume science, volume/S science, etc. And simultaneously, male and female are two different bodies. That's exception nature simultaneously with everything else in demonstration of hyper-additional, how it is hyper-additional to itself, how it is hyper-generating the one identity of value progression that all things as space/existence, as they really are, as an only increasing value, where value is nature/nature as value. As for every nature, only the extent of it is debatable. See, but people have debated offensively what is not debatable and gotten away with it, not because of intellectual uh, superiority. All exception nature and demonstration of the same thing. Because this is employed to roles, uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, identity treatments, identity the grounds, voicings treatments, smallest finite details, individually grouped and together. See, the increasingly important to understand. The increasing positive, only increasing positive or negative value of the truth of how all ground identity, ground locations were and still are tactically denatured. A landscape theater, a facade of visiting of businesses locations, of homes locations, let alone the people stacking from made only fathomable. And the whole time they made everyone fight about the quality, it would have been worse. They took complete possession over the quality of human fact-achieving nature with individual finite grouped and together details. So nuclear weapons are manifest. Where and how practical reason, for example, use Immanuel Kant's phrase, as it can only speak as a theater because that's all it has been taught to think. This breaching method knew that to counter predicate acts, they would have to blame what is now the phenomenon of modern nations. The locations, areas, and states' voices. They have to blame other things, others, or ourselves, wrongly for the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures on all locations, areas, and states, including regarding. So, in other words, but if the might behind that, in other words, the only reason there's might behind that is because syntactically, because of the species body, what we really agree about. All exceptions, nature, and demonstration of the same thing. But everyone missing it because everyone's not using logic properly. And it is relevance to 3 volumes this way. And for example, demonstration distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously is the value of that which is unfolding physically, as the value of the identity of physics, as the value of their identity who speaks for their identity, a value of their identity of physics. These identities, a breaching method knew would increasingly be needing to use knowledge to get over on the rest of the species bodies. Use roles with an identity theft / fraud / slander method this way to all locations, areas, and states since before our founders were born. There was an order between and two. How sickly, distinctly every difference, Native American, more pigmented skin, and or black, because that's how it's still referred to. And not one has taught about I read this from nature itself. What black's about is why we have black pupils and whites of eyes, and it's not about physics alone. It's about physics, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that. Distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, while metaphysics is the same thing. is distinctly, non-distinctly, and it is an identity of volume, where value is nature. So as nature is value. Hyper additional to and hyper simultaneous to the physics as an identity of volume, where value is nature / nature is value, and the sciences share an identity. So pantheism can be led by hyper-Pantheism, and any individual's voice, any group's voice can be checked for authenticity of practical reason. Not one has spoke for practical reason, because we have locations way more, and they're way more. In other words, only for evolution science really looks like games. So, for example, India said, I believe it was on MSNBC, so a representative of India, and they were talking about them, but they have migrant problems too. And so they said, well, they'll just have to tag along to really figure out. Syntactically, no one knows how to speak about it, because each location, area, and state was and is increasingly victim of what nature itself is demonstrating to us as what we need syntactically to refer to as a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, and referring to countries A through Z as archetypal criminal enterprises: forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, taken as shock and awe, tortured, worse, only capable of defending everything from speculation, perception, all voicings of the ground, of value, of nature, tactical ulterior from that which really is dual. The religious leaders didn't have a that quality / IAS of fact human nature afforded themselves. In other words, people who don't believe in religion, uses of how people have interpretations of religion. When people have crazy, increasingly the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures were employed to keep them increasingly blamed on other things, others, ourselves. In other words, and then syntactically that defended, and because per how it knew and exploits how defenses of that can't defend themselves and us from the complete syntactical possession over the quality, therefore over all qualities of fact human nature, at all locations, areas, and states, everywhere the species volume is, even in outer space. There are proofs that it has increasingly been demonstrating since semi-ancient times that our one species body systems have been caused to, as its nature, as its Leith of Hadith, as an interpretation of Leith of Hadith, that is forced space nature transfer, and that being relevant to how its identity of volume, its identity of value, its identity of volumes, hyper volumes, identity of relationship to itself, the hyper simultaneous, and the increasing value of that. And so, better than a calculator, by putting a prefix hyper and the suffix nature, In other words, if you guys are nuclear bomb natures. You guys are hyper-nuclear bomb natures. And that is in this context where you guys are victims slash hyper victims and victim predators slash hyper predators against our volume as it actually as you are against yourself. And you guys know it, and everyone's trying to voice it. But while everyone's trying to voice it, see, everyone had predicate acts blamed on individual groups. They have a method. They have complete, there's collusions between overt criminal enterprises, private ones, originally and still. We don't attack, we don't, this is built if we're blaming ourselves, there's not to blame. See, they need people to perceive that why are you blaming? No, we have to discern it through these things. We have means to open up thousands of locations, even if temporary. And all kinds of people would be able to, wouldn't even, it would benefit them. Like, help to have them great meals. People are right now homeless, needing to tag along, things like that. Narratives, people pretending they could speak for practical reason, when they have realities such like that, and the simultaneous haven't been forbid. Psychology, for example, it is concentrated there, but we can't overcome other roles with what is fluent through our nations, where and how there is a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. And we need syntactically to counter it and to overcome it, quote, at last, to be free at last, quoting Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. E-class. Boxing is fast. Where and how? There is one way to fight where the hurt's not won. In other words, all this blaming Hitler or that, and simultaneously is defenses of what leaves out the quality of fact-cheaping nature that's needed to counter what had and still has many ways, what is actually recorded, complete possession over A, therefore B, over Boolean logic, over the quality of fact-cheaping nature, over those who with suits and ties, as those of overt criminal enterprises, as those private, and as those opinions A through Z, relevant to where and how increasingly valuable is needs to understand how differential criminally foreign influenced our people's, when people say, oh, it's political or that, they're leaving out exception nature. There is a method by the means of logic as it is actually manifest. For example, being these 3 volumes, physics as volume, these 3 volumes simultaneously, and hyper additionally, where we are, how we are semi-nature relationship to that. All parts of your body, they are distinct sequence / simultaneous natures from your complete nature. But when they are positive onto themselves, they are positive onto yourself. But we are further a semi-nature relationship. That's how it is manifest actually. It is distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. hyper-positive to all parts of space nature / existence equally. But then it is a little bit especially different here as Earth's difference, as our relativity, as a subject that is relativity to it, how it is space / existence, and how it is hyper finite and too finite to even mix with the order of the finite, but one way, being that which is inseparable from the smallest finite detail that had ever been generated. Only the extent of it is debatable. And those who debate it will have inherent to their qualities and aspects of fact-cheaping nature, ground voicings, conjunctions, value treatments, and such. In demonstration of the same thing. See, but offensively, for example, this measured and maintained precedents and statutes differentially increasingly criminally foreign influenced with regards to the questions and the answers only capable of being, again, for example, even relevant to what Jim Crow laws were about. We have to use phrases like criminal insidiousness and understand how this is about. We have to understand that and how there are 5 distinct identities of sequence nature that are simultaneously, each one is, every sequence nature is simultaneously / a simultaneous nature. We're, in the extent we are actually capable of discerning, and per its relevance to, this is where and how we are grouped on and off campuses of each age and nature in ways people missed. And that was exploited in ways that people missed, even our most sophisticated. This had complete possession of all parts of the ground before our founders were even born. It measures and maintains our own measuring and maintaining for their own reasons and uses of it. And for other reasons, hyper-additional to this, it makes and keeps, blaming what it caused on other things other than ourselves. It employed that to increasingly employ it to keep victim predators motivated also to roles, hurt, tricking, forcing, persuading, all leads into the voicings actually that would have been, into the voicing we are as the species body, actually that would be relevant to such impositions. Having to hold a nuclear weapon, having to have one pointed at each other. Now, you don't separate that subject from what led up to it, and how and why they recorded self-valued. No one ever had brought up how the database relationships were criminally foreign influenced. Positive and negative treatments are overtly / in other words, A, therefore B, in other words, and they were hiding proofs from this that nature is demonstrating. Because this made everyone ignore what we're actually capable of understanding at each age instantly, as on the same page, There are proofs that little kids were supposed to have been taught about paying attention to the little finite details, not talking about mulch, whatever like that. I'm talking about what really causes positive or negative value nature progressions, acts of natures, and what really is being voiced by nature, not the environment. The environment is a hyper additional chalkboard to what is forever greater than it, increasingly greater than it, and increasingly more finite than it, while it is becoming more finite and greater than what it is already, no matter what, even if it is negative to what, to where, and to how, and to why. The rest of space nature has no criminally foreign influences, especially differentially, overt ones or legal ones. See branches of government that forced to entertain Jim Crow laws treatments or slavery treatments. So that's an overt evidence /S/IES evidences of criminal foreign influences, of the existence of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments and of identity treatments and collusion. Simultaneously, that means uses of ground locations, formal, overtly criminal influenced. In other words, not only did it have complete possession over all the identities that were driving colonization, and that were involved with slavery. You know, this knew that people would be defending and self-valuing with their logic and defenses of themselves, everyone. That and how we are now no longer allowed to even use, the science of how and why we are actually bound, individual grouped, as we are actually grouped, and species that we're actually species. And so the methods that each branch is locations, and the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones, and people A through Z, and locations A through Z. It was sustained against Native Americans. It was sustained against the colonists. Everyone rolls. It was already had complete possession, was sustained against the countries involved with such. It was sustained simultaneously. What is actually recorded was actually everyone was self-valued. Multi-front sciences rolls with this. Multi-front private rolls with this. See, more and more it knew those roles and locations uses would need to hide nature demonstrating that having been, and to come more and coming more, and active as actually active. And so the breaching method knew that it could increasingly show this to every no matter how powerful a leader could get, even it could only be above all locations, areas, and states criminally foreign influence, positive, negative treatment simultaneously. Yet they're already. And I'll go and can't defend themselves and afford what we really all think about New York City, or about when we see people stacking. It's all right, we have to have mass farming. There's a breaching method that forced this, though. It's one thing to say that or to stick up for the farming, which we have to do, but in other words, it's another thing to stick up for the farming specifically while measuring and maintaining. In other words, exception nature left out. To understand our founders, you have to understand that breaching method that had all identity ground locations as sense and sensibilities, as the arrays of emotions, knowingly not allowed to voice what it's really about with the simultaneous. In other words, they have shootings recently that reported on by Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. They have shootings all the time in the country. See, the surface of the ocean, to an extent, it can't help but be overall unstoppable beauty. But that value can be forced from here. Lethal IDs, force-based nature, Earth's a special difference. That's why increasingly plastics are going into the seas. Even if we stop the plastic that already went in there so long, it's slowly becoming little particles, goes into the fish. Why and how we have to take economic positions. You take economic positions, you're entertaining slavery. You're entertaining leaving out that breaching method against Native Americans, against our founders sickly distinctly and sickly non-distinctly and sickly simultaneously and hyper simultaneously. So we have to understand that how the locations were programmed. So we have to understand how we are identity of volume as actually conceived, individual, group, and species body that can only be. In other words, we can employ, you guys just ground it. Say, it's right. Just say, we admit. Help us by, fighting the way that hurts not one. In other words, only about the idea about how to lock down value systems, at least to an extent. And so change the nature. How could you have a nature where you can't have natures of assurances when no one has spoken for practical reason to even hear about it? This employed each age of fact human nature, apart from our actual hyper-native, that which were the voicing of Earth's a special difference. Increasingly, this would be demonstrated by nature, but increasingly other is self-value, going to outer space, for example, because of how the breaching method against countries everywhere the species body is, individually grouped and together. It forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded the phenomena of locations, areas, and states, forcing whatever leader is there to entertain uses of criminally foreign influenced uses of positive treatments, negative treatments, identity treatments, sequence shifts, and simultaneous values, denials, and identity theft, fraud, slander method, specifically designed to exploit where and how each identity has a semi-nature relationship to the hyper-simultaneous that is actually manifest. At best, Baxing's English was really, I read this from the nature of English itself, where value is nature / nature is value. And the other languages are hyper additional to this. And we are hyper additional to them when the species volume is in a positive value nature progression, which it has not been since semi-ancient times. This just reminds all exceptions, exception nature, are in demonstration of the same thing. Boxing. Boxing's one way alone. All spring from box. In other words, so to you guys should ask Ukraine and Russia if they would be staged, because we have to do something now. And we can't, if we build the same thing, that's built only capable of causing negative value nature progression, stagnation. The suburbs from America to Russia to Ukraine, since before our founders were born. Same thing, countries A through Z. Everything, the Earth system and voice is tactically denatured. That's what most people in our countries really believe. See, but people inherited politics. People inherited narratives with democracy, dictators, military reactions, defenses of that. In this context where practicality, let alone hyper-practicality, this method measured and maintained that it had no voice and was going to pretend other anyway. So now an individual can't use what is actually recorded properly. Clearest evidence of day. The hypernative system. The species body system is prevented here. And sickly hyper additional ways to specifically to keep that from being voiced. So we have means to the whole. How many people love animals? How many people, if you guys give in other words, we could turn all these there's difference between turning negative into positive. Like, you don't want to shoot guns from your house. Then you're in war, you're shooting guns from your house. The house is getting blasted out. That's getting defended syntactically. That's all that was ever known. And so, in other words, so they would have crazy, crazy trials. Which trials? Real or made up? It was said real. In context where to every person, how many people know that they're lying to us about the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, predicate acts, syntactically regarding color treatments and slavery, per how it actually got here, per how it actually was manifest, and it is manifest. To understand this, we have to understand the part of the volume science that we know is true always about itself, constantly, invariably. And with that, and the value of that is with the value of that is discernment of that which causes positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, is capable of revealing means out of nowhere. In other words, so each of these countries, you could be rewarded. You have the right to write this book about it. And in other words, as a guide to this war game, where we can show, for example, the predicate of English is a main verb. Otherwise, it will have a participle or a nature. Or, in other words, identity. The identity of a main verb is being discerned distinctly from other identities of relationship to itself that a verb can have. And in other words, and a predicate act is showing an identity of relationship to the volume that humanity is, that is as criminal insidious in its nature. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a person of electronics, but it's the electrical engineering of our species of volume. That again, these are tactical theory from once upon all the leveled volume. How are you? Once upon volume. So in other words, we're speaking about the species volume. And we're in this trap where no one knows how to speak and react, for example, relative to things like war, which are part of slavery. In other words, they leading up to it too. Again, this is about how no one spoke for what is practical. It is more probable and is more practical that boxing, martial arts, and wrestling had been revealed with the other sciences sharing an identity. And for example, individually grouped and together, and they are being grouped and can be used grouped. And there's a way to counter fact, human nature oriented collusion /S as it is actually manifest. See, everyone missed this because the discernment of it requires discernment of ourselves. But in other words, for example, there's a difference between, thank God, we have no way, when they forced those crazy laws on the colonists, on the Native Americans, colonists, sickly not just to keep our non-distinctly from being discerned. So not one has learned, and other was learned in place, sickly, distinctly, differentially too. We have worse than not a standardized American education, because measured and maintained was lack of sophistication to the interpretation of our founders and how and why they wanted us to tell about how the locations, areas, and states had been roles entrenched too long. In other words, no one had means to unentrench roles with what is entertained syntactically, relevant to where and how we are actually manifested as value/value progression. So this is more so, and is more finite so, where and how computers work. East Campus Jerk is a stolen name. It is sign. Level of volume, it is sign. I don't understand it. What you're saying? Once upon, but in other words, think about how in other words, we could bring order here. I mean, in other words, if you guys present to us the rest of the species relevant, not blaming just for having nuclear weapons or having needs to have that simultaneously where no one spoke for practical reason in the first place. For example, where and how no one spoke about misspelled sign. Did I misspell the title of my video? I don't know. I'm sorry if I did. I didn't know I don't know how good at titles. One spot only. This is in other words, thank God nature demonstrates negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. If a body, like a country or a state of a country or location areas, the individual entertains slavery, nature is going to demonstrate negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Like criminal insidious is nature. As an electrical engineering and conjunctive to where and to how we are actually syntactically manifest, which is syntactically / hyper syntactically, because we're supposed to be dealing with exceptions properly and honestly too. We're supposed to be dealing with the identity theft / fraud / slander method / S overtly and / insidiously being having been manifest, because there are means actually recorded to show what actually happened in the past. And the value of what actually was truth before the order of the finite now is only increasingly valued. Per that system and per those means, that are evolution's fruits against means that are syntactically actually capable of being revealed instantly. That means simultaneously, we have to say, you guys have to help these countries with the nuclear bombs. In other words, and if we'll do this, in other words, we'll help you guys with those things that no one knows how to do. So when they bring up border in our country, they're bringing up where and how physics, metaphysics, and identity are actually bound. So the main identity of the computer is discernment of the other identity as semi-nature relationships to it as its own as sense. You and under the tablet. I'm on a desktop or a laptop. I'm on a laptop right now. Hewlett Packard laptop. Shout out to Hewlett Packard. Apple, give a shout out to Apple too, though, because the species body has to work together. We could do this because imagine how many locations Americans would open up if they had, the legal means to tell us. But like president, if we order ourselves, presidents, leaders of other countries, they'll sign executive orders because we're already set up to emit what is actually already recorded anyway, which we already all want to counter anyway. It's not like the accident simultaneously. They keep blaming what and why and how New York is actually manifest the way New York is. Those people, in other words, that can't be entertained. It can't be taught about properly without understanding the fight to make it secure, even though it's insecure. It can't be, in other words, we have to admit that why and how torture was supposed to be prevented. Slavery, is a volume science that we have to take proper recognition of. Psychology was and still recorded is delusions raw. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a police form, I'm not criminal, I'm not a judge. Psychology, they're still fabricating things into databases, fake conversations with people, roles with identity theft, frauds with their worst patients and criminals, framing people with their family members. Dark beacon. See what is dark and what is light. Everything is about the simultaneous and about what is hyper addition. Here, positive to itself, everywhere, and hyper additionally here, or it is forced from here. Leaves of Hadith, force, space, nature, transfer. See, English was revealed to teach this with hyper-Pantheism, which is syntactically that, in other words, that which came from some ancient times before sciences became individually grouped and together, entertained, criminally foreign influenced. Therefore, our representatives here and there, our kids, our adults, simultaneously, sickly, distinctly too, by the way, our middle age, a tactile terror from the having been voicings, use of other people's names, of selves names, as of sequence values, of simultaneous values, as quality of fact sheet nature, aspects of fact sheet natures, not by accident, you know, and all kinds of like not no longer capable of dealing with the finite, with using the past as a value with finite, with all that we know. I mean, you know, where and how it could be used here now to gain these means where people will agree instantly because they want to save animals. So they have all this land and stuff like that. People will give that land if they're going to get help in other ways. No, we're not give the land, but they'll open up to work together as a species body, open up space means out of nowhere that were never there before, to absorb the populations of humanity that are also being and haven't been employed as everything else, even people A through Z with political opinions. We're differential criminal foreign influence, differential but increasing. And it was using everyone remotely. And while that is going on, everyone's using what it caused originally and still remotely. Has syntax nature, has style that simultaneously can't defend that and afford used properly the identity, how and why the identity, the science is sharing identity. So it works this way where we could discern. No, we're supposed to learn. Hawaii, I bought once finally I bought for Hawaii one time. I don't know if anyone took it because they took my Facebook page or whatever that was on. But I hope they did it. I gave them a gift of the idea for um, all Halloween's Eve, all Halloween's Eve for charity. Because that's Native American too. Whoa. So this breaching method. American history cannot be taught properly until we have taught properly the real causes of criminal insidiousness. Till we understand how our nature, entertaining, the ground, tactically, criminally denatured, is going to increasingly have nature demonstrate negative value, nature progresses act of nature, and it employed other needed to be pretended, and it handed everyone words like the environment, phrases like the environment to speak for nature, pretend to be speaking for nature, to pretend that nature has ever been spoken for about, honestly, to pretend that practical reason has spoke at one podium. Equality of fact, human nature, that offensively was measured and maintained, prevented per this method again, too, that no one realized. And that's why we have to understand that there are such things as fact, human nature-oriented predicate acts. For example, if a mail crime or wire crimes are committed with people also with more than 3 states and with other countries as collusion with that, in other words, they do things like that are called predicate acts. I'm not a lawyer, not a police firm, not a criminal. Then they pretend they don't realize that, and they've been replacing that which is actually recorded with fabricated audio and video. Our sides rolls with that breaching method, fact, human nature oriented way. So it's all our countries together. So they are shocked and awe. They don't know how to respond while pretending other, while acting, all natures of good or bad reactions or non-reactions to with why and how really, even though it's juxtaposed a whole bunch of things, why and how really the people are immigrants and things like this. There's huge caravans. If you watch Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, they show there have been for years now huge caravans of people with our country. There are people trying to go into countries that have no homes. There is still like a native population, where and how there is still no, there's still only criminally re-engineered, having been the republic for which we stand, its campuses system, campuses of each age and nature. And so, in other words, for example, medical campuses like Harvard Hospital was instituted in 1822 on the campus of Harvard Hospital. There's the Institute of Living that was founded on the campus of Harvard Hospital. And hospitals throughout the country have mental health people that work with hospitals. And they have conjunctions to the people that run our systems with fire departments, with the courts, state judicial branch offices, state prison offices, increasingly locations next to these locations. Now that all locations have been kept differentially criminally for influence increasingly, but it's where and how no one wanted to have collusion with such. And it makes exception nature by making people entertain positive, negative treatments that they know are simultaneously preventative to them defending that and affording voicing of the value of sequence truth from the past before the order of the finite with the subjects brought up, like with American history, like with the value of physics, like with identity. See, now, one of the things it was sickly distinctly against everyone, sickly non-distinctly against everyone, while it was being sickly distinctly against everyone, it was an identity theft / fraud / slander method. Because now we are now no longer going by, there's also proof that we have to discern nature's nature and the value of that to discern nature. I forgot what I was doing. But in other words, we can it is recorded, but is actually recorded. Anywhere a war is manifest, anyway, are proofs that leading up to the war, and since there were victim reactions that didn't know any better syntactically, because of that which was commonly pulled over non-distinctly against each country, and it is still effectively used. Because, in other words, our own are increasingly criminally foreign influence, and everyone else's are increasingly criminally foreign influence. Qualities and aspects of fact, human nature, with their opinions and convictions, which would be overcome But then, for where the predator part comes in, the victim reactions come in. For example, people don't go to parties, and they make exceptions. If you go to a party because you went and then you try to say you didn't go, then they're going to say you're lying. They have parties to lie about how people showed up there and to exploit the exceptions, to get over on exception nature. Because there was a complete possession over all identities of intelligence since before our founders were even born. So, for example, our locations, areas, and states confessed, demonstrated, and recorded and confirmed. Also with federal, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and directors of the FBI in the defendant capacity / IAS to come and having been. Like there's one guy at New Britain Superior Court, looks just like James Comey, even if it wasn't James Comey, former director of the FBI. Another victim predator shot at now FBI directors. And the colonial equivalents and the voicings about our founders since founding. These when people speak, they be, for example, about emotions. They're leaving out the emotions are only functional one way, and they're about the simultaneous / hyper simultaneous. But that quality of fact-achieving nature to use that, in other words, if you entertain the logic of Jim Crow laws and of counters to it too, now. In other words, simultaneously premises of treatments are blaming on other things, others, ourselves, and leaving out the actually recorded breaching method. Also screening it. Also making sides arrays that are in the furtherance of the same illusion. So in other words, there is a difference between not being natural, what is natural. The only way slavery was natural, or is natural, as criminal insidiousness, as exception nature in demonstration of the same thing, as an identity of the ground, as an identity of an identity relation to itself, and the value of that. Hyper additionally as an identity of relation to the ground's identity of relation to itself, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously as ourselves, and the hyper simultaneously itself. So bound. So all here gathered round. So Connecticut interbranch switches names. They did that as victim predators because they had to hide what they were. They had to hide live progressions that had been preemptively, simultaneously, actively at the time, and increasingly needed by their sources. People who took part with police reports, calling the police. Such means are used to keep differential criminal foreign influence uses of all locations already being and having been self-valued. And that was used for this identity theft / fraud method that has manifest styles of logic that can't defend their opinions and afford discerned voicings of what people actually think and want and need voiced. So it also has private overt criminal enterprises and countries fighting with each other. Know what simultaneously they're doing. They're voicing A, therefore B. Bomb, therefore bomb. Gun, gun. In other words. And no one ever spoke about, no one ever spoke for science, truly. Yeah, first. And with the, in other words, the sides have the rights to have negative, nuclear weapons. And punks with defenses of such. Even if not punks, punks wearing that's who spoke for the law, punk. Victim, predator, punk. Never spoke for slavery, honestly. Pretends it's racism. It's a breaching method. It was a predicate act delivery system, a criminal insidiousness nature delivery system method. An identity theft / fraud / slander method. But that's where and how value is being used by its cores. So all we have to do, all you guys have to do is admit that. And we'll help, in other words, imagine, it's not just so many how many different things we could stack. And we use hyper-Pantheism as a standing religion, as a science. See what you're going to reveal. They've been pretending people have uncommon takes on religion. So they have mental problems. People associated with the courts, people with our databases. With this method was entrenched since before our founders were born as a database relationship, as the campus Marcius. Of this campus system of this ancient republic, as it actually had been by the ancients. People use passions and emotions by Caesar's name, more properly a title. They left and leave out how, recorded as evidence is actually recorded self-value. Roles, natures, needs, criminally foreign influence, opinions, convictions, qualities, aspects of fact, nature, regards to the reception of ancient, of modern and of active history, and being as is actually being made. Increasingly, dishonest speculation and prayer, hyper longing, hyper agenda. So we have to admit, and we could use, in other words, we take away so many problems, then we have all kind of resources. We relieve all kind of problems that wouldn't be. We simultaneously admit that we know we're going to hurt. Our countries, our locations, areas, and states are dependent upon everyone being and having been at the end of the whip, including our leaders, no matter how powerful they get. And only comparison, dictator, not democracy, not. I'm worried about democracy. If you're worried about the democracy, follow mandated law. Make it don't call people names if they tell you and attach them to fake words with yourselves. Someone has to follow mandated law when the three branches don't, and they've been fabricating audio and video, and they don't give writing, and they use mail and wire crimes already. So I don't need any more confusion. I need a response. See Renaissance, boxings. I teach you things belong. Yeah, we'll never break. But no, so thou must be no. We are, in other words. Agrees that no, I'm not a doctor, Ron. How are you, Ron? Ron Adams, man. Good to see you again. Have you heard of the ringleaders? Who are the ringleaders, Ron? Was just speaking about criminal insidious. Mo, Larry, and Curly. They are actually I remember them from back in the day, black and white. Ron, Mo, Larry, they used to go like that, and one of the guy would go like this to defend. In other words, but this is also, so we have wars and things like that. They have animals. They show us the animals that are dying. Meanwhile, if you know how many people love animals, and then they have all these people that have no homes that would die to be, they were longing. Some of those people would want to be someone who helps the animals, and the rest of the world will give them the means where they have to have water from out of nowhere. I heard there was an invention where you could put a water bottle on your bike, and just by driving your bike, it pulls water into the cup. And in China, I heard, I think I saw in a YouTube video, they're making the forests grow where the deserts are growing. There are proofs that the deserts are growing because nature is demonstrating to us that since some ancient times, the ground's locations were all, in waters too, were all tactically denatured. And that was made self-valid rules with it because they made exception nature. In other words, how nature demonstrates positive or negative value, nature progressions, action, nature is going to take place. They changed that to another system, and they made rules with that sustained. So then, nature will continually demonstrate that, need to demonstrate that through the syntax of everyone. But then everyone's sense and sensibilities would sense the syntax of everyone, trying to go after what they're inclusion with. Even when they speak about, when they say George Washington owned slaves, they leave out how they had to hide the rules countering slavery. Because they would have been, there was complete remote possession of the colonizers, individually grouped and together, the countries involved with that at the surface. Because where it was being exploited, where being sustained, we are value slash laborers, all kinds of instances. That's what, just like with the computer. So they make things that are too complicated, that are complicated, that are simple, complicated. They pretend there's a complicated, and things that are complicated, they make them simple. And that's self-value because all these value treatments, in other words, we're in a semi-ancient trap, tactical terror from how identity is supposed to work. Tied to how we are syntactically actually manifest. I taught best Ron Adams, vaccines. I teach us things, species body. I don't play a video game, but I will keep your video on the background to listen to. I have to get the age gaming system going. This is pantheism, hyper-Pantheism is what I'm saying we should do. If we shut down the threats from, what countries can't help but admit to us, if we chase down their logic properly too. See, they have the news locations irreproachable because of how they are victim predators. They get locked into defending their actions, and then they can't afford the value of sequence shifts. to be told on, so they'll attach people to fake words. They don't know the extent of the damages of such predicate acts roles they have, but they know but they know they have to hide it. The same way our directors, former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his defendant capacities, former standing chairperson on racketeering influence to corrupt organization act. He has recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with some Mendez police and Domain police on and off Fox Connecticut News. Also with criminally foreign influence uses of Judge Napolitano's Facebook page and of people's persons, names, their roles with wire crimes, mail crimes, with buildings next to their religious spots, criminally foreign influence uses of identity theft, fraud, slanders that male and female police forms families, military families, criminally foreign influence differentially but increasingly have next to at the locations next to the state capitol, not by accident. That place never had been liberated from that which our founders actually left us to teach and to demonstrate about how all locations, areas, and states, north and south, were enslaved themselves, fact, human nature enslaved, forced to entertain what had been entrenched uses of the science, not just uses of the sciences, bound tactile terrier from how they're actually bound by nature and per its needs for Earth's a special difference relative to the rest of space-us existence. And so heaven and hell more probably and more practically and demonstrably were revealed by science of pantheism. And this is also part of the subject / an improper interpretation of modern religions should not have left out how there was criminally foreign influence, how criminally foreign influence readings of history not only were, but were self-valued and are self-valued. There are formal, informal, criminally foreign influence opinions and convictions, for example, regarding what caused slavery. In other words, as collusions. That breaching method set that up so sick like that then to have everyone now do exactly used remotely, defending themselves, pretending they could speak for the law or for the nature of the law, pretending it had been spoken for. See, they can't speak for it at locations. They can't speak for it everywhere at once. So they increasingly need at their locations to force, trick, or persuade. Those locations used to further finite active progressive illusions, sequence shifts, roles and instances, uses of their own names, other people's names, things like that, that can't go back and afford that discerned. Increasingly valuing fake things typed in databases, things acting at locations in conjunction with that. Increasingly, people like Native Americans and Black Americans have a breaching method sickly distinctly against them specifically, and to keep our sickly non-distinctly from being discerned, and to measure and hurt, and worse, anyone who in dissents, anyone who starts blaming it on this and sensing and discerning it caused by the breaching method. Now, to do this, we have to say what was slavery always, constantly, and what was it variably? Oh, it's racism. That's variably. Nobody wants that. We also need a movie so you could see. We changed the colors, but you read it honestly, and you're going to see that. prevented are the short words and the revelations that come from like slavery was caused by a criminal insidious delivery system method. Slavery was caused by a predicate acts delivery system method. Slavery was caused by a breaching method. Slavery was caused to engineer as one part. It was not just criminally legalized roles with that. In other words, it was slavery against everyone sickly distinctly, while measuring and maintaining everyone in reaction to it, needing to blame other things other than themselves wrongly, and or they just attacked everyone with the fake words. If they words anyway, they whatever used remotely. Originally and still was anyone who was going to pretend they could speak for practical reason. Use again the phrase of Immanuel Kant. So, in other words, any country with a nuclear weapon, more countries than these countries have nuclear weapons. In other words, if we can have you guys as a body, at least you guys, America, China, Russia, and Ukraine, and India, America, China, India, Russia, and Ukraine. Fine. In other words, what about us? What about the economies and stuff like that? Listen, we have saying, okay, all we're saying is this is in other words, we want the species and need the species now, better than free, to fix the tactically denatured identity of the grounds, identity of the relationship to itself. Water. The only way to be led, to know what to do, the only way to have the means to be able to, in other words, if we are on the same page, we could spread all the resources. Okay, hold this here for this. We have to step, the species body has to step back, look over at this. What about the, in other words, we could dig deeper and grow higher, but not the way the breaching method did it. And everything's tactically denatured. And too much plastic went in the ocean. We need fresh water anyway. We need social interactions that are being led. How to explain how social reactions originally and still are left influenced by that which is entrenched with as that is functional to that which has complete remote control, possession over the qualities and aspects of all locations, areas, and states of humanity. Every country, everywhere humanity is, even the ones in outer space. By sayings of grace alone. What did I forgot his name, the guy who went on Jeff Bezos, Mr. Bezos' rocket to outer space. He comes back, he said, Earth, Mother Earth. M, Mother, 13th letter of the alphabet. See, I don't know, but apparently they have names for their letters in Russian and or in Ukrainian with the Z, I believe. I don't know. As they show pictures of tanks, it wasn't clear. I was going to look that up, what that means. There are proofs that English also has this. I've never read this. I read this in the nature of English itself. A stands for alphabet. A stands for alpha. You see alpha in the root of the word alphabet. and or if you want to call differential, let's see, bet that root. But M, 13th letter, middle letter, mother, O, omega, what comes right before O? Neutral. See, mother is neutral, omega. Neutral to omega and neutral to alpha, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously as herself, as the human volume, where and how. Alpha and omega are inseparable. So yin yang. There is no conjunction. There is constantly the coupling of our conjunction to the value, to the increasing value of its identity of relationship to itself. The hyper simultaneous as volume, as the hyper invisible, as actually discernible, as proper use by the invisible but still discernible. English was revealed to teach about the invisible but still discernible. Z stands for zenith. In other language, other languages has hyper definitional. Has hyper additional meaning. And so you heard it first here. YouTuber Anthony Wall. YouTube.com/C/Romulus Wall. So Anthony Wall, aka Romulus Wall. Also my boxing name. I play no game. I'll train. And it was also interesting how the first part of the Old Testament and the first part of the Quran, they won't let the value of that what is actually that's spoken there be valued properly, and they won't let that noted. The value of sequence. See, this knew that it could keep everyone differentially, increasingly, victims, reacting, hurting themselves and others, needing to describe it syntactically or ignoring it, etc. In other words, all tactical ulterior from and with uses of positive with uses of factual quality aspects, realities, from our needs to use those words like instances, words like sequence, words like simultaneous, words like identity, words like complicated, words like simple. So we have all kinds of juxtaposed natures and methods to get over on our locations, areas, and states. We already had them used originally and still, where it counted the most. So, 'tis not spirit, 'tis not Holy Ghost. That's just every hyper additional. Cipher/decipher. In other words, hyper-Pantheism is the science of the campuses and of the republic for which we stand. Proper archaeological, one of the best yin yang is an archaeological evidence. Alpha and omega are archaeological evidences, simultaneously relevant and relative to how the alphabet is named the alphabet. One of the reasons science reveals the nature of the body of nature, that in the body of the nature of English, which is greater than and more finite than it, well, as itself the nature of English. Has a semi-nature relationship to the hyper-simultaneous. In other words, in English and Arabic, there are proofs that they, in other words, the ancients understood where and how these sounds have a better than living identity of relationship to itself than themselves. Just like the parts of our body have a better than just living identity of relationship to our complete our complete body, to this including the species body. So in other words, by syntactically, the leaders saying, admitting that they're going to admit that practical, no one spoke for what is practical, honestly, because we're in a semi-ancient trap. Because they had to counter predicate accident improperly. They had to they had to speak for emotions. Emotions are about the simultaneous. In other words, we're going to be led by what really is going to cause positive value nature, progressions, action natures. In other words, and we distinctly, some countries were hurt more by the ground, all locations everywhere the body is, tactically denatured. But thank God that shows us where to put first. So we have to stay equality. But we have to stay exception nature that is increasingly, keeping it towards its needs for equality. And that requires constant contemplation, everybody on the same page with a method. It's all right if people want to have different, in other words, we have to define what's a practical use of God. We have physical delusions, raw, criminally foreign influence, fact, human nature, psychology, leaderships of our branches of government, collusion with them too, with that. All kinds of scams, because that was maintained. They knew that they could use those locations remotely. Same way they use but everyone's differentially criminally foreign influence. Everyone's forced to hear, speak through things to other people because of the method that uses all identity ground locations. So simultaneously, we could show the identities at all locations, areas, and states. Satisfied with things as things or not. If they're satisfied with it, their logic is going to present, needs not to be disciplined, but to be, in other words, to be revealed as victim-predator reactions through only made capable. In other words, we have to blame it on the breaching method. We have to show what's actually, because it's actually discernible. In other words, it's going to show there are means to show everyone lying. How that was exploited, is exploited. And so everyone missed how sickly, non-distinctly. Everyone's enslaved. That's why, ever across the globe, the suburbs and cities look exactly the same. Little facades of businesses, not because they agreed about business. Simultaneously, they simultaneously left out exception that you don't deal with the economic variables. For example, if slavery is involved. And if you really take American history honestly, both the North and the South were fighting against slavery while they were fighting each other. Our founders forced counter extortion of everybody to counter that which was entrenched with that hyper slavery, that sick sickly, non-distinctly, method, singular, to all locations. To keep that surface screen theater, to keep everyone programmed for that, to sense and hurt anything that would even come anywhere near the capability of forming any kind of a unity that was inclusions. Or of any kind of independence that would be capable, to liberate the species body voice that really longed as each. Someone must teach. Free speech. All we have to do is claim, well, simultaneously, while we're going to claim homelessness unacceptable and have means to it, we could simultaneously sense if we're doing it right by claiming simultaneously all locations, areas, and states tactically denatured. Means to it. Means to, and this is where and how we are fact-sheet nature oriented. This is where and how evolution's means and gifts come from. This is where and how and why really we are identities. Volume. This method knew that it is very simple. In other words, little kids could understand what criminal and citizen's natures of positive and negative treatments are. Little kids could understand what the phrase criminal insidiousness is about. See, but if they understood that, because if they had taught to them properly, it would break the opinions and convictions and not entertain with them also delusions wrought simultaneously, speaking and having spoken for, those questions imposed. I mean, those questions asked, longed asked, longed or longed understood by nature's nature, and the value of that only increasing itself. It is itself the body of each individual. It is hyper additionally making that individual more and more a group too. In other words, value. Where it's value to, we are value to it. We are more and more of the existence / base because an identity of value / value progression is manifest. Only the extent of it is debatable. But such as it was and is offensively pretended other by all formal, private, formal meaning interbranch, private, and meaning exception, nature tied to the interbranch, services, military, Coast Guard, even down to, and up from, what do they call it? With the kids, any of the local, orphanages. There's a complete possession over the integrity of morality that has gotten away with it because of this method that effectively senses and discerns who's going to defend the short words properly when they're capable of it in grammar school. We are capable in grammar school to discern and to explain how our rights, how the Native American rights, firstly, for example, and how Black Americans' rights originally still, and simultaneously discerning with relevant to where and how we know we have means way better. We lived since before cars, before our founding parents were even born. The suburbs were designed. So control the mind, Bach sings. Enough people agree about enough things. In other words, to have enough means too, especially if we're going to fix our countries individually or grouped, even if we all do it all together by the wrong system, as a nature that's not trying to prepare to adapt. Not to adapt, because the economic, we have to adapt this way. I'm saying adapt, but what's really going to cause negative value nature progression, what really caused the deserts. There are proofs that it is not impractical. It's probably more practical to convict that or opine or theorize that mountains had been disassembled, relevant as roles with the plan, that effectively forced, tricked, or persuaded, took as shock and awe the identities of the entire species volume, the entire species identity of value progression, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, took as shock and awe, self-valued roles. Now, tactically bound, tactically individuals, grouped in species body, represented voicings, tactical terrier from how by nature itself, where how nature has that way. That is either positive value nature progressions, evolutions, fruits and gifts, means out of nowhere, or least of hadiths, negative value nature progressions, acts and natures. Like criminal and citizen natures, wrongdoers, wrongdoing itself, like predicate acts. Forever protracts. So, in other words, species coach. In other words, we could get the species coach. I'll donate that. Can't leave out in other words, how we need mandated law, follow their locations and to branch together. They can't play these games anymore. And we're going to see how, their roles with these identity theft, fraud, slanders, and secretship. So everyone has to understand, too. Interbranch switching names. You're going to watch. They didn't just do that for no reason. All kinds of different ways, too. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Ron Adams. Everybody go check out the content of Ron Adams in a one spot only. Thank you for coming out this evening. And I forgot. I should not forget, but how I forget. Let's do this to counter war. Not because of the obvious reason, because it is part of what nature demonstrates as tactical terror from the course. That it guides, that it reveals, will cause positive value nature progressions, acts, natures, and means out of nowhere. All I have to do is agree syntactically that was that and how the value nature systems left out, how the grounds are tactically natured, how they were employed by a breaching method, even though everyone didn't discern it. All identities of sophistication / non-sophistication, again, used remotely, differentially criminally foreign influence, differentially increasingly relevant to that, as we'll discern. So each please learn, attend. In other words, we'll make the problems into books and there'll be an income source. There's a difference between making positive out of negative and making hyper positive out of negative. And that's also relevant to where and how things like prayer, words like prayer, were re-engineered. So people, they hear it, oh, prayer, oh, they think we're talking like that. I mean, that kind of contemplation, like if you were going to take a test and you had to like, you know, if you were trying, made to figure out existence as best you can, space/existence as best you can, not leaving out the slightest finite detail. Its method has means to sense that, because you have an extent of complete possession over what is more finite than the smallest detail that has ever been physically generated and maintained. I thank you. Have a great night. YouTube.com/user/Robbie is also the and watch Boxing Arts. Anthony Wall, Boxing Arts. So I have to get a professional boxing license. Thank you. Bye.